Yeah, yeah, Joe. We'll start.
Yes, we're live. We can start.
Yeah, so hello and welcome to the School of Environment and Architecture's fourth thesis symposium titled Psychogrammars of Space. My name is Rupali Gupte and I teach here. One of the things that we've been articulating is that design culture is has largely been application based. And the dangers of that often are that you only have precedents to learn from, or worse, that you follow current trends without paying attention to where they come from. And in doing so, also reproduce some of the structural problems, violence that these spaces produce. So this semester trains students to ask and understand deep structures through which space and materiality are produced. On the backs of questions being asked across disciplines, as we draw from a common pool of references, as architecture students, they focus the questions around crafting space and form. And it is through focused questions around psychospatial dimensions of space, questions of type, behavior, experience, that students begin to ask here how we might think of questions around spatial justice. So this format is in some ways, it's the format where they write a long essay pursuing one question through the semester. And this is where they learn to ask long questions about this precisely, this idea of crafting space and form. Also, another thing that we've introduced in this semester is that besides questions that are asked through text, students also learn to work with drawing as a method. So how do you in some ways think of drawing as a method rather than representation is something that students will be pursuing and asking questions through. One of the again, I think what is important is really kind of the discussion that happens here. And with that, I'm also happy to say that the discussants with us here, Kush Patel, Vishwanath Kashikar, Prasad Khanolkar, and Sarovar Zaidi have been our companions and friends in this discussion for a long time. And this is in some ways just as we focus on long questions and long durée, articulations. I think these have also been long durée friendships that we've built. And so we invite them year after year because of this kind of, special bond that we've built with them, but also because they are very sharp in the way they ask, questions and help us articulate some of the responses through which we think of spatial questions around justice. So with that, I think I would like to invite the first panel, because I won't go through the details of their bios. I'd ask my colleagues, my moderator friends, to go into the details of their bios. So the first panel begins with Ravi as the moderator. Ravi, would you like to come and introduce the first panel? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rupali, and welcome everybody. I think this is fantastic. I am actually, after a long time, sitting in a session of the school like this. It's partly the pandemic, which is, of course, the center of our subject today, and what it has done to me and my relationships with my spaces. And so in that sense, it's quite an interesting symposium to be a part of. So in this session, we will have this is a session on architecture of care. And we have two panelists, of course, Rupali, as Rupali said, they are the insiders in some ways who generate an outsider's view for us. And that helps us a lot in kind of constantly, improving our methods and improving our content and everything like that. So welcome Prasad and welcome Vishwanath. seeing you after a bit of time, but it's wonderful to have you both back here at the school. So let me just, for those students who may have not, and the rest of us who may not have known them, Prasad Khanolkar is an assistant professor of geography at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati, India. His research as an academic and urban planner has focused on different urban issues in different cities, including Mumbai, Gurgaon, Portland, Nairobi, and Addis Ababa. That's quite a range of spaces and experiences, I'm sure. His upcoming book from Routledge offers a new way of thinking about slums and southern cities based on a grounded engagement with the relationship between media, objects, spaces, and people in the everyday life of slum localities in Mumbai, India. His new research focuses also on Guwahati as a labyrinth of urban circulations in Northeast, where people move through it with different temporal rhythms while using it in different ways. So that's Prasad. Welcome, Prasad. I'm longing to hear your comments and contributions to this subject. The second panelist is Vishwanath Kashikar. Vishwanath is a tenure associate professor at CEPT and who is intrigued by the relationship between clarity and creativity. I hope we get to hear some more elaboration of that, Vishwanath. Over the past 13 years as a full-time faculty member of the Faculty of Architecture, having taught most courses at the undergraduate program, he has developed an interest in architectural education. He has been part of many curriculum revisions at CEPT and now conducts teachers training workshops and curriculum revision workshops across the country. He's actually, I think, he was invited for a couple of sessions here at the school as well to kind of understand his notions about, his ideas about education. He's particularly keen on studying the gap between teaching and learning. That's another interesting space that I think, I hope at some point, maybe not in this session, one would like to kind of hear from you. Vishwanath is also interested in urban housing. His research focuses on studying the spatiality of apartment buildings in India. Through courses on housing design in India and national and international workshops, he attempts to explore the limits of architectural design in housing. So that's Vishwanath Kashikar. We have, so welcome both of you. And we have 4 students today who will present. And I'm going to request Abhishek. Abhishek, are you going in first?
Yeah, I'm going.
Okay, so I'm going to request Abhishek. And I think the way we would do this is after every speaker, if any of the discussants wants to kind of seek a brief clarification, that may be sought. But then after all 4 of them finish their presentations is when we will engage in a discussion and finally conclude the session. We have time till 11 a.m. this morning. And Abhishek and everybody else, please note, you have 7 to 10 minutes to present, which I suppose you have already taken it as 10 minutes. Okay, so let's get started and all the best.
Abhishek, you're on mute.
Hello. Yeah. Hello, Abhishek here. My thesis topic is environment and habitation, and my supervisors are Ravindra Kunde and Dipti Bente. Starting with the concern, disconnect between the architectural space and the environment. I've always thought that the environment is something that makes one feel relaxed. My idea of environment is directly related to the nature. Since I've joined architecture, my passion for learning about space and its connection with nature has increased. Nature is the most important part of the environment. The notion of environment in architecture has become a separate entity that could be manipulated or diverted to create different experiences. But it should hold the environmental flows and work with them to create more inclusive space. The thesis began with a simple question on the basis of designing a built form. Why are built forms and their surrounding environment seen as a separate entities when they both influence the space equally? To be the concern, I entered the research to the research question: what is the relationship between the environmental flows and the spatiality of comfort, energy conservation, experience, and care? For the
Can you
question,
speak a bit slow?
Abhishek, you could read a little slower so that everybody could understand.
yeah,
Okay, it's getting a little difficult to comprehend what you say.
I
Yeah,
will just
go
read
ahead.
the
Sorry.
question.
Yeah.
So, the research question to which I arrived at from my concern is: what is the relationship between the environmental flows and the spatiality of comfort, energy conservation, experience, and care? Uh, to enter the thesis, the major operative concepts through the readings I arrived at are: how can I connect artificial environment created by humans to the natural environment? The two major concepts are the study of environmental flows and the biomimetic principles. Environmental flows here are the flows of human activities, animal activities, flows constructed by building materials, and flows of ventilation. And biomimetic principles are natural processes translated to the sustainable solution. Through these two major concepts, the form can be designed, which act as an organism, which is adaptive and it is adaptive, follows passive methods, and built from locally available material. There were many more concepts from the readings. So the reading through the reading of atmospheres by Peter Zimthal, the concepts were sensorial experience, the experience of the space through emotions, thermal comfort, the temperature, interactive space, interaction with the material and the space, composure and selection, the design of movement and circulation, surroundings, environment of space. It can be a space around, like under a tree or inside or outside of the house. Intimacy in space, the proximity and the volume of the context and the space, play of light, compatibility of materials, interior and exterior, and the play of sound. So through this concept, I am entering the field. So my field here is the four vernacular houses, which I have chosen, are located in Pimpalner village, in the vicinity of Dhule. The houses are vernacular houses and are studied through the experience of space by spending the whole day in the house from morning to night. Due to the use of traditional techniques to build houses and also due to the use of earthly material, there are observations made about the temperature difference and zones of practices in the house. Here, the first house is Chotu Lokande's house. Chotu Lokande here, Chotu Lokande here is a shopkeeper who has an agricultural product shop. The house he lives in is built by his grandparents 120 years ago. The house is made from mud and wood. Material used to build a house modulate the environmental flow in a way that it makes the interior of the house comfortable to habitate without harming the surroundings. Chotu Kaka says that from early morning till afternoon, of the most of the afternoon, activities happen near the window because the light is moderate and really not harmful, and it also allows them to get warmth as the mornings are really cold. And the rest of the day, they prefer staying inside as the days are very hotter. The backyard and the front yard of the house allows the house to get fully ventilated. The first drawing here, the diagramming the zones of practices in the spaces by human and animals. In this drawing showcases the flows of human and animal activities on ground level with an emphasis on the zone and ambience instead of physicality of the built form. The texture highlights the different atmospheres formed and influenced by the rigid building. Throughout the day, the wind in different speed provide throughout the day the wind flows in a different speed, providing a different experience. The morning breeze refreshes the thought and makes him feel more connected to the nature. As there is a tree in the street, the afternoon have slow breeze that makes him feel relaxed. The video helps in capturing the fluidity and the motion in the wind as the environmental flow. In this drawing, spaces shaped by the fabric building. The fabric of the house allows the actors to use the spaces in a different ways at different times throughout the day. As Kaka mentions, the wall create a comfort zone near them. As you can see, most of the furniture is set up toward the because the walls are made of mud and they create a comfortable environment around it. The atmosphere near the wall is much more comfortable than the windows because the days are very hotter, so they spend most of the time near the walls. Through this video, I would like to explain the configuration of elements modulate the flow. The configuration of elements in the build form modulates the flow that shows everything is in continuum. The emphasis is on the environmental flows and the focus is on the movement. As you can see, swaying of trees, activities of people in the video is in continuum. The walls create the environment around them, and which we can see in this. The second side here is Goku Wani's house. Goku Wani is a farmer. He has been living in the house from 70 years and still he finds his house new every day. He owns a couple of cows and does milking by himself. He believes that every living species need to be considered as equals. It's a vernacular house made from traditional building techniques similar to Chotu Lokande's house. The study of this house allows me to understand that how practices of different actors change according to the material configuration and adaptive use of environmental flows in the house.
Abhishek, could you again slow down, please? I think it's getting difficult to understand again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the third site here is Kishore Badan's house. Kishore Badan is a two-story is a shopkeeper who has a house. The house is two-story house situated in Bazarpet area of the Pimpalner. A part of ground floor is the shop that invites the market crowd every day. Being a general store, a lot of people visit shop every day, creating a lively environment. The crowd in the street and within the shop create a lot of noise that travels around the house. The shop is also brightly lit compared to the rest of the house. The other parts of the house are shaded and remain dark for the most part of the day, with little natural light entering from the small windows at almost all times. The house is illuminated by artificial lights. The backyard becomes a common place, which also remains shaded because of the proximity to the adjacent building. In the evening, it creates comfortable space for gathering. The relationship between his customer, friends, and relatives allows for the private space of the household to become publicly accessible through the shop. The blur between the edge of the street and shop the, allows for the flow of social interaction, comfortable living, and overall collective environment. Sunil Lokhande. Sunil Lokhande here is a steel shop owner. Sunil Lokhande lives in two-story building and has a steel shop on the ground floor. The house built by his grandparents 300 years ago using the locally available building material. It is situated in the central part of the Bazarpet area of Pimpalner. Due to the steel shop on the ground floor, there is a lot of ambience of sound. As the shop is located in the market, there is a lot of movement happening in the front yard of the house. Every Friday, there is a bazaar when the environment of space with street changes dynamically. 4 generations of family have lived in the house and it still has the same experience in the case of lifestyle. Due to its connection with the surroundings and involvement of different actors, the house has always had changing environment which in turn designed the practices and zoned in it. The fabric of the building allows the environment in a way that it modulates the flow to shape the practices of the countless living species. So, the intent of the study was to find out differences in all the houses as a result of environmental flows, but they turned out to be more similarities than tied them all together. In the current architectural discourse, the focus of the space is on the built form and its physicality, and hence that gets reflected in the kinds of drawing that are made to show them. This thesis also sets up an experiment in drawing form and space through flows and additions to build form. These drawing methods also helped understand the intricacies in vernacular houses through the interaction of inhabitants to the sound and materials. Video as a method helps to encompass the environmental flows and helps show the activities and robustness of the various actors as a continuum. The case study helped understand how vernacular houses and their design work by holding the flows of the environment instead of diverting them. Through the study of traditional houses, I conclude that traditional techniques of constructing a space have always adapted to the environmental flows, and that has helped the practice of using space in many ways in different environments. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhishek. Do Shanath or Prasad, do you have any clarifications you wish to see, or can we move to the next? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Who's going next? Grishma? Yeah. Okay. Great.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, good morning all. I'm Grishma, Mehta, and my thesis is about the everyday ecologies of care. Walking on a road, one does not feel afraid when there are multiple people around, even though there is no interrelationship between them. There is a knowledge of knowing that someone will have your back if something went wrong. Care for me is the interdependency which occurs in the neighborhood through networks of everyday routines. The argument here arises about the relationship between the care and the spatiality of the neighborhood. Thus, the aim of the thesis is to identify the relationship between the networks of care occurring in the everyday routines of the neighborhood and its spatiality. I investigate the same by identifying, mapping, and documenting the routines occurring in the neighborhood with various layers emerging through the lens of crisis, with different networks of care in 3 different types of neighborhood having different kind of architectural patterns. Stories usually travel through gossips. I entered the site through the narratives in the time of crime. Usually during difficult times, who do people fall their back on? And hence, how does the neighborhood accommodate and respond to such difficult times? Further, by identifying sites in the neighborhood, certain patterns started emerging, which then led to me to understand the concepts of network density, care, interdependencies, and security. I further broke down the term crisis into crime, emergencies, and conflicts for better understanding better. Now, 3 types of site which I went to was a self-built settlement, an apartment type, and a row house type. I will be narrating 6 of such stories under the trope of crime and emergencies from each of the neighborhoods. This narrative is of a self-built settlement. The incident takes place during one of the festivities where one tries to attack the woman for money but ends up being stuck in the settlement itself when trying to flee. The consecration and the porosity which the settlement holds saved the situation as chaos was created and everyone was alerted. A similar incident had occurred in the streets of an apartment type neighborhood where when attacked, there was no one around to help or no one even in the site to call out for help. The lanes become so lonely, and due to this distinct separation of spaces, the possibility of collapse is low. The one who attacked managed to run away since there was no one around. In a row house type neighborhood, when a robbery occurred, it was due to the materiality of the roof one got to know, and quickly the word spread among the society and they managed to catch the thief. Here again, the scale and the spatial configuration of the settlement help. When we compare these 3 narratives, usually when a crime occurs, people react differently and even little offenses can make or break the situation. Here, we saw how a self-built settlement, a labyrinth, settlement, a labyrinth of security net which already exists, takes in and lends itself to save the situation. The density there around one helps catch hold of such incidents due to the porosity. When we compare a similar incident with an apartment type neighborhood, we see how quiet it usually gets, having nothing around to look for help. There is a disconnect with the state and the activities happening on the state. In the case of row houses, the cluster row formation saved the back during the robbery as it became easy to communicate and understand the situation. The next is under the trope of emergency. So, Mukta auntie left the house without turning the gas off. The vessel was on fire and there was smoke all over. Opposite the house, Swami used to work in a workshop where he noticed the smoke emitting from the windows and the door. In no time, people gathered and broke down the house to shut the fire. The density and the intimacy of the neighborhood brought out the interdependencies in this case. Similarly, when a fire broke in an apartment house of an empty house of an apartment type neighborhood, there was no one around to find out that the fire broke. It was only when it was only when someone from the opposite building saw the fire and saw the fire and the smoke emerging in huge amounts, and everyone was alerted. Soon the fire brigade was called and to shut the fire, but it had already burned down the house. The visible segregation of living life in the apartment restricts the communal connection to a certain extent. The courtyard in a row house settlement usually takes in a lot of activities. It helped one notice the fire during Diwali when a firecracker hit the plastic sheet. In no time, people managed to bring down the fire. Whenever a fire breaks, it becomes easy to vacate the surrounding area. It becomes necessary to vacate the surrounding area. There is a high possibility of fire spreading in a cell-built settlement due to the close cluster of houses. People smell the smoke and prevent it from being burning down. Where in the case of apartment, nobody around even realizes that a fire was broke. It was only when someone from the opposite apartment saw the smoke and alerted the residents. It could have been possible for the fire to spread across the whole floor. Similarly, in the case of a row house neighborhood, due to speedy reaction of the society, they managed to pull down the fire. Similarly, it was observed that how nodes and common spaces and takes in when there is a conflict in a cell-built or a row house settlement over any of a disagreement or a shared resource. But in an apartment type settlement, when a conflict like a domestic abuse takes in, it stays inside the four walls. To conclude, the relationship between the built form and the social behavior in all three neighborhoods changes according to different incidents studied in the research. In conclusion, to all the narratives, the built form of a settlement highly influences the relationship of care in the neighborhood. The labyrinth formed by the house apartments and the porosity which the neighborhood holds in a self-built settlement acts as an aid during an attack. The boundary walls in an apartment type neighborhood are so high and concrete that it cuts off the visual connect and a possibility to move around when a crisis arises. And this distinct division of spaces in apartment type neighborhoods reduces the overlaps and hence the roads are often empty. The placement of individual housing opposite each other in a row house settlement helps when crime occurs for a response. The scale and the materiality of the neighborhood enables the possibility to react quicker in a row house settlement. In the case of emergencies, the intimacy of houses in a self-built settlement sometimes share the same wall or even a roof. There, the density of the neighborhood brings out the interdependencies and securities due to the everyday interaction, whereas the visible segregation of lives in an apartment restricts the communal connection, and everything bottoms down to keeping dependencies among the members living within the four walls. The courtyard of a row house settlement adapts to each event and allows everyone to involve, interact, and enable the visual connection. One common observation during conflicts is that people prefer maintaining a distance. Eventually, the nodes and the common spaces adapt to the fight. Apartment typology permits certain power through the configuration of spaces. In a row house settlement, small disputes occur on a daily basis but are usually resolved by the parties involved. To conclude, taking from the research, the self-built settlement affords to hold such a security net of care during difficult times, whereas The apartment type restricts the communal interaction due to its partial configuration and disconnect with the surrounding. However, the row house settlements lends possibility for interaction and communication through which the basic relationships of care are built. Thank you.
Thank you, Grishma. That was very interesting. Is Sumesh, who's going next?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, okay.
Ravi, just
yeah, we should. Yes, please.
I just had some quick clarification questions, Grishma.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
the apartment that you talked of, could you just quickly tell me how old is it and how many floors?
The apartment which I
Yeah.
visited was 6 to 7 floor
Okay.
story.
And it's a very old apartment or relatively new?
No, it's relatively new, around 20 years old.
Okay.
Not
And
that.
right. And just one quick question regarding how you collected the data of the incident. So for example, when you said fire, did you go and ask around in the society if there was a fire and looked for people and interviewed them, or
So I entered I entered through the term crisis only, and as I started talking with people, I realized it would be better to narrow it down, and then after visiting few of the neighborhoods, I divided into fire, like emergencies, when a crime happens, and when there's a conflict.
yeah, no, my question is very specific. So when you
About the
went to
method.
when you went to the apartment, for example, did you ask the watchman कि यहाँ कभी fire हुआ या नहीं? And when you went to the row house, for example, did you knock on every door and ask कि किसी के यहाँ fire हुआ या नहीं? I just wanted to understand that component.
No, I wasn't this specific. I generally started a conversation with like जब कोई crisis होता है तो like not crisis but कभी किसी की जरूरत पड़ती then how do you people manage, or and
Right.
then the story started emerging.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Sumesh,
Yeah. You can hear clearly, right?
very clearly.
Yeah. Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so hi, I'm Somesh Nadkarni, and my thesis intends to explore the different spatialities of social security and resource dependencies that emerge in informal neighborhoods in Mumbai. It is also comparative analysis that intends to study how security in a neighborhood changes when the existing spaces get institutionalized. So Sudhir Patwardhan's artwork Street Corner is cinematic in the sense that it simultaneously brings different scenes together that talk to the viewer. The spatiality enables people to care for each other. The flow of resources creates a safety net in the neighborhood. However, in the case of urban transformations, one sees that the configuration of spaces creates alienation and a reduction in the sense of security. In simple words, to sum up the concern, when existing spaces are transformed, their spatiality decreases the sense of security for the people. So my hypothesis is that how does the architecture of a neighborhood lend itself to produce social security and resources for its inhabitants? I enter the above question through conceptual understandings of the terms like social, human, and economic resources, publicness, interdependency, patterns, proximity, density, gender status leniency, porosity, and interconnectedness. These help me figure out opportunities which one can hold on to, and the problems which arise due to contradictions in the field. So James Gibson talks about social security through shared practices and affordances of public spaces objects, whereas Abdul Malik Simon talks about intersections and conjunctions of socialities. For the field study, three self-reliant neighborhoods have been identified across the city. A self-built neighborhood by the name of Ambedkar Nagar in Malad East, pavement dwellers near Aurora Talkies in Matunga and Dadar Tilak Bridge, and a chawl located in Kalbadevi, and two institutionalized spaces to study the transformation, a slum rehabilitation project in Chandivali, and one shelter home. So I refer to Sudhir Patwardhan's paintings, those that have overlapping and interconnected spaces that give the viewer a sense of walking along the roads by creating a structure of movement in one's mind. The painting is not meant to be looked at from one vantage point, but is seen as multiple parts standing at different positions, watching with different perspectives. Similarly, Peter Bruegel's Netherlandish proverbs and Nelima Sheikh's paintings draw on multiple narratives in one large drawing as well, where scenes of daily life and their stories are often juxtaposed on the landscapes, and each actor has a story and agency of their own. I'll come to the field study now. So Ambedkar Nagar is a self-built settlement which is located in the forest zone along the border of Sanjay Gandhi National Park. There is a presence of large multi-purpose extensions to houses called the verandas, which give opportunities for multiple transactions to take place. The oldest man in the neighborhood has been paralyzed waist down for 5 years and spends his time in the wheelchair parked in his veranda and can interact with people, which has had positive implications on his mental health. A nearby doctor happens to check on this man, and because of his visible presence in the veranda, it ensures that enough people are watching out for him and ready to rush for aid during emergency. The doctor's house has a patient's bed beside a door that opens into another yard on the side between two neighboring houses. The door is always kept open, where kids playing and families chit-chatting in the backyard in the evening time provide a sense of security. The front and the back verandas allow mothers to keep a lookout on their children as well. Most of the women gather under the peepal tree to work. They sit on the plinths and make imitation jewelry. The work happens through cooperation where the network of women supports each other. The central open spaces afford large gatherings of people for leisure and work purposes. Secondly, the pavement dwellers near Aurora Talkies and Tilak Bridge consist of a large population of widows, single mothers, and young children that have either migrated to Mumbai for job opportunities or run away from home from assault or domestic violence at home. The presence of physical infrastructure like the bridge with its thick structural members, large plinths, empty spots on wide pavements, metal fencing, trees provide affordances for the pavement dwellers to dock themselves onto, but with no resources at all. They also have access to discarded building materials, which they use to build temporary shelters. The area has in its vicinity a public toilet and a canteen, which provides them with water supply, toilet and bathing facilities, and food. The street is always busy, occupied by vehicles, pedestrians, and hawkers, which allows them to be anonymous, but the eyes on the street also give a sense of security. This busyness of the street also provides them with economic opportunities. At the same time, many social insecurities exist for the women on the street due to embedded patriarchal relationships. They often have to fit into the roles of wives and mothers to make sure that they have inclusivity in the community, since those who cannot are often discarded. For that very reason, being married to an earning man is deemed to ensure security for them and their children. Thirdly, a bar-type chawl is built around a small Datta temple in Kalba Devi, with two corridors flanking its edges that look over the courtyard. Since the chawls were technically built as male-dominated spaces, privacy for women was non-existent. And to make up for that limited space, their strong presence got manifested through shared practices and daily rituals. They participate in shared practices like sieving spices, bathing one's child, washing clothes, and khanavals. So many of them come together to run a tiffin service for the people in the chawl and who live alone, or tenants who work late night shifts and are unable to prepare their own food. And in turn, the person would take tuition for the women's children. These parallelly placed kholis with openings at both sides offer space for kids to ride tricycles and people to move across the corridors, while also keeping an eye on the sick and the elderly. The corridors are like assemblages of collective property. They make, in a way, which offer for sitting and talking about politics, films, gossip about mutually disliked neighbors. In a way, they make sure that they are present in the field of view of others in case anything happens to them. Here, the aromas coming from the neighbors' kitchens, those of garbage stench, and smells during festivals are all sensory experiences that make one feel secure in the neighborhood. So coming to the comparative analysis, Sangharsh Nagar is a slum rehabilitation project in Chandivli that was created to house evicted slum dwellers, largely from Ambedkar Nagar. The spatiality here, configured as an apartment type, changes the idea of security to that of protection and privacy. The distinct hierarchy of circulation creates a disconnect between the outside and the inside. The verticality does not allow for eyes on the street, which is the most active space as people set up stalls and markets throughout the day. The visual and auditory connections are cut down by corrugated fencing. The distinct circulation pattern consisting of a staircase, a lobby, and access doors to individual apartments create a sense of privacy where the doors remain closed throughout the day. The elderly specifically here find lesser freedom of movement and feeling of being trapped behind those doors. The configuration also leads to parents worrying and getting anxious about the child's safety since they cannot look out of their balconies and windows to keep a watch, as all they see from the windows is neighboring buildings. Children also grow with a sense of privacy where households are separated. Finally, we come to a two-storied structure that sits at the bottom of a pedestrian bridge outside of Churchgate Station, which was initially a warehouse but eventually got set up as an institution to house orphan boys under the age of 18. As it is also an inhabitation of the city infrastructure, similar to the pavement dwellers, this space allows for eyes on the street. And due to the proximity to two major stadiums, the children started making their living by getting employed as cooks for the other kids, or by creating and selling items during major sporting events like the IPL. Being located in the middle of the city provides many economic opportunities than shelters located in far-flung suburbs where real estate prices are low. However, the institutionalization of the shelter tries to discipline the children by enforcing a curfew on the eldest of the kids. The city infrastructure is modified to create a high wall with small windows to imprison the children and ensure that they don't run away. The space is further cluttered with furniture, storage, personal belongings, and other miscellaneous objects. The small windows allow very little light and ventilation into the place, which is also an attempt to hide the fact that this is a shelter home to the city, almost as if the city is embarrassed by its homeless. So to conclude, the thesis concludes that the certain spatial configurations provide a sense of security to people and certain others take away this sense. So the spatial form that is interconnected, porous, and accommodates in density produces a greater sense of security as opposed to the form that seeks efficient circulation, leading to clear destinations and movement patterns. The extensions to houses in the form of verandas, corridors, bridges, and courtyards allow for spillover of activities, interactions, and provide vantage points to a lookout. The rehabilitation schemes, on the other hand, hinders these communal practices and sociality by encouraging privacy and protection. While the sense of security comes from the security of tenure, the high maintenance costs and family disputes makes people sell the premise and leave. In the case of the streets, a robust city infrastructure provides the material resource to make homes. Here, the security is produced by proximity and access to economic opportunities and city resources. Although women face vulnerability sometimes due to exposure and having to depend on male counterparts, these problems are not unlike those caused in enclosed institutions. But the case of the shelter home shows an adaptation of a city infrastructure, which, unlike other institutions which are far away in the city peripheries, bring a sense of security due to its proximity to economic opportunities and hustle bustle of the city. However, in its treatment with its high window walls that want to hide it from the city, it creates containment and segregation. The institutionalization further curtails the agency of the inhabitants of the night shelter with strict rules and discipline. So from the inferences and opportunities presented above, this study pushes us as architects to think about how one can rethink the spatiality of a neighborhood that promotes the growth of social security and resource dependency among the residents. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anybody for Prasad or Vishwanath, any clarifications?
Just
Yeah.
quick question, Somesh.
Yeah.
Those colorful drawings that you made.
Yeah.
Did you decide that you will draw like that before you knew what case studies you were going to take, or was it after you knew what case studies you were going to?
I think I had decided to use those colors because I think that is the way I see the city, and it also brings out the quality of each of the neighborhoods. Like how in the first case it is the forest zone, so the colors, the mud and the landscapes bring out the forest quality of that site. While in the case of the shelter home, if you see that the pavement textures and all those things bring out the.
Somesh, my question isn't why you use those colors or asking you to justify the colors. I'm only intrigued के सेमेस्टर चालू हुआ तो तूने पहले ऐसे सोचा कि मुझे ऐसे कलरफुल ड्राइंग्स बनाना है और अभी टॉपिक ढूंढते हैं और देखते हैं क्या स्टडी करेंगे, या you decided I will take these 4 case studies and then you felt this way of drawing is a good way of that study?
Yeah.
The second one, yes.
Yeah, the latter. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Prasad, any questions?
No, I don't.
Okay, thanks. Jugal.
Hi. Thanks.
Hi.
Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi. So my topic of this thesis is the neighborhood community and spatiality. So story from an electoral board from North South 6th. So yeah. So when I'm performing my internship term, so one of the project I got to work on was is Chiplun. So when I went to the site, I noticed that the relationship between the neighborhood houses were like a warm-hearted to each other. So after being shaped by the mentors and the faculty, the research questions is how does the spatiality shape and is shaped by the neighborhood community. So after the reading the article of the MK Smith, the articles open the 2 points, boundary and formation in the major reasons the community form. The boundaries is formed by the law or map or physical features like roads or rivers. And formation describes the people come together like from the same place, same interests or communion, or this is the lens helped me to see in. Yeah. So as a result, I'm bringing the analytical framework as a compound of the uh, study like my so by looking at the each location of my neighborhood board north are north division 6 uh, the learning about is history, characteristics, formation, practice, interactions, pattern, and festival celebrations. Yeah. So, so far I focused on the sections of the Daisar and its electoral are not board 6. So the proper so this is closely to my the hometown with neighborhood Ambawadi, Parvat Nagar, and Oripada, Shailendra Nagar, and Marathe Colony as a neighborhood. So my yeah, so my grandfather was one who migrated from the Gujarat to Ambawadi in search of better life and work. Ambawadi is currently being developed by the private and developers, and the SRA is to build further. Yeah. So yeah. So the referring to the framework, I'm seeking for the type of organization and how they work in the Ambawadi. So so the question helps to see in the detail of each organization, like what is the name of organization, how work does the organization do in the locality, how does the organization work for the what are the assets, what are the problems of the locality, what are the opportunities for the locality, what is the nature of the community and the emerge in the work of organization. So, so the type of organization there are self-help group, educational, religious caste, business and political. So you see that in self-help group there is a Shri Mahila Bachat Ghar, and education there is a BMC day-night school and Holy Family School, and religious there is a Gujarati people mostly are the Gujarati Marathi communities, Muslim communities, and UP people. And yeah, and the political is a Silsena is another favor of that are not part. And so drawings are done as per the framework. Like the drawing shows the timeline of the Ambawadi. Like how was the so Ambawadi was the first Amka Bagicha. Then after the people migrate and it took to the place to stay. And after in 2021, the people, the developers and the SRAs are coming up. So the image show the first image show the practice of in the livelihood in the chawls. Second, the market praise in the Ambavadi through the lane. So these are the two schools of the BMC made when the population increased. But now the one school is shut down and the one is there is less occupant of students come because people now refer to the private schools because of the infrastructures. Yeah. So this is the slide I'm trying to show that the space change when the festivals happen in the Ambavadi. So there is a masjid, how the masjid become in the Eid, the vegetable shops are closed and they whole lane are when they do namaz. There is a bus stop on the corner side that how the bus stop or the bus stop is dismantled and be the pandal. Yeah. So this is the edge of the Ambavadi. So when the heavy rains happen, the Sanjay Gandhi National Park open the river gate towards the Desert River. So what happened in the edge? Yeah. So so in the first image talks about the different communities help in this situation, how the community organization of the different neighborhood like Shailendra and the Parvatnagar comes and helps to their relatives and neighborhood ones. Second image shows the how the image how the school help to in these situations where the people lives and stuff for the few days. So, this is the regional organizations. Jain Temple serves food in the chawl and the schools when these situations if come. And second image is a political party that political party help in the cleanliness of the drainage systems and the blockage. Yeah. So this is the second site, Parvat Nagar. So Parvatnagar and Oripada is the near to the Ambavadi. This is also a place where the migrant people came to stay and also the typology is mix of slums and buildings. Yeah. So yeah. So yeah, the self-help group is a Bhadrakali Mahila Bachat Ghat. Regional caste is a majority Mumbai's Gujarati, Marathis and Jain Samaj. Yeah. So Shailendra is a residential area. So here the educational institute, post office, fire brigade, and the military camp for so an upcoming metro station behind the location.
Jugal, you have only 1 minute more, huh?
Yeah.
10 minutes.
Done. Yeah. So yeah. So self-help groups like the Parthiv Mahila Bachat Ghat, education Shailendra, and political yeah. I just so yeah, so I'm in the Shailendra, the first image talks about the institute character. Second image talks about the pattern of interactions that how what is the it is a part of main part of the interaction in the Shailendra Nagar. So, with the construction of the railway lines connected the Daisar of the city, Mumbai in the 1867 came the first lot of migrants. The people from the Sindhudurg regions of Konkan, they migrate, established the first planned residential area of Daisar. And yeah, I'll just quickly,
Your 10 minutes are over, Jugal.
yeah, I just
Please
conclude
hurry
my
up.
slide.
Yeah.
Conclude my slide. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I came with a conclusion that we can observe the agency of the people in the defining the space in the crucial shaping a community. The space of community build settlements, hold the negotiating and tight relationship that afford the space of extend, morphed, adapt themselves during a crisis. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jugal. Any clarifications, Vishwanath or Prasad?
No.
No, I don't.
Okay, so I'm going to request, the way we'll go is I'm going to request both of you to comment on either each one of them, whichever way you want to, of what, and kind of open up the subject a little more. And then we will open up the, it's 10 o'clock, so we can take about half an hour for your conversations, and then we will open it up for another half an hour for the everybody else to participate in that discussion. In the meantime, I'm just sorry. Welcome, Kush. And welcome, Sarovar. I just saw Sarovar having just joined in. And so I kind of look forward to all your participation in the conversation that we'll have later. Okay, so Vishwanath and Prasad, please go ahead and kind of, who wants to go first, Prasad or? Okay, Vishwanath, yeah, please go ahead.
Maybe, yeah, I'll just put some maybe 2-3 sort of pointers that I would really like to have a conversation about, and then maybe Prasad, if you also have points, then maybe we could begin a conversation on that. So, so I had thoughts related to mainly 3 things. One is on doing research itself, where when I was looking at all the 4 studies, and especially when I was looking at their first few slides and then the slides where you actually have the case studies. And the question in my mind was that usually it happens while we are doing research that in the initial part, or when we begin doing research, we have some vague ideas, thoughts, or the ideas are very large. And we do a lot of readings. And then it is, and it happens everywhere, that at some point in time, you realize that time is flying by. So you need some case studies or buildings or spaces in which you need to anchor the study. And so then one sees a point in the research where you get the case studies. And then you have to sort of connect all the books that you have read or thoughts that you have with the kind of study that you will do. And I thought it would be interesting to discuss how in each of the 4 studies this happens differently. So that was one of the points on doing research. And the other on research also, I thought it would be interesting to discuss the role of doubt while doing research. How much do you doubt your hypothesis or your aims while you're doing research, and how does that reflect when you are actually doing the case study? So these are sort of 2 thoughts that came to my mind on doing research. Then another interesting topic I would like to discuss is the drawing itself, because I think Rupali, in the introduction, you also mentioned that that is one of the sort of long-standing searches at sea about how do we use drawing in different ways, and definitely look at drawing not only as a communication tool, but okay, we also talk of drawing as a thinking tool in design studios. In this dissertation, it would be interesting to see how drawings have been used as a tool for doing research, as an analytical tool. And there also, I think there were some interesting differences and similarities in all the four projects. So I wanted to discuss the drawing, and of course, finally, it would be about this session itself, which is about architecture and care. So, which is about the object of the study of spatiality and uh, 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 environment, behavior, and care. So these were sort of the large points. So. Prasad, how do you want to do it? Should I go into the detail of it, or maybe we park points and then discuss? Or...
Sure. I mean, I guess we can give individual comments also, and then maybe come back to the larger.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, so all these, of course, these points came up when I was listening to, I think, each of your four. So let me then point out in detail where these comments came from. So Abhishek, when I was looking at your study, it was very fascinating when you started with where you were talking of the idea of environment and habitation and the disconnect between architectural space and the environment. And you are talking of the relationships between environmental flows and biomimetic principles. Okay. And then when you started showing your drawings of these vernacular houses, and you were primarily showing flows of people, and you are also showing flows in terms of smells and sounds, that is where for me it was a bit difficult to make that jump. Maybe in the actual study there was a lot of churning before you translated the idea of environmental flows and biomimetic principles into air flows and sound flows and human being flows. So but what I was also quite intrigued by in your presentation is the way you were trying to draw the flows and the struggle of drawing the flows. You know, so when it came to, for example, the air flows, you actually made a GIF where you wanted to show the air, but when you were drawing the people flows, so there was this drawing where there was this background which background and people sort of uh, frozen. I mean, this is a structural problem of a drawing, right? That the drawing is frozen. I mean, the tool itself is frozen in time. But what intrigued me in this is when you were talking of flows, I thought it would have been interesting to ask flow at what scale. Is it a day? Is it a month? Is it a year? Is it a century of flows? And especially since you're talking of environment, what kind of flows do I want to show was sort of one question that I had started to wonder about. The other is how do we show the flow itself? So I think I'm sure you must again have looked at a lot of drawings where either you keep drawing lines which represent movement of people and then you get a jumble of lines. That is sort of one way of articulating flow. But I suppose what these kind of flow drawings might be able to tell us is what is the density of flow in different parts of the space, right? I do feel that if you were to add that component in your drawing, where where you say that wherever the flow is most dense in terms of number of people or uh, uh, the frequency of wind or the intensity of sound, whatever flows you're talking, it, maybe the kind of conclusions that you might be able to come up with, I think could be even more nuanced than what you had presented. Uh, Moving on to Grishma, the same kind of questions about, I mean, drawing, about doing research as well as about the content itself. Now, what I found fascinating is that right in the beginning, you said that you are looking at these three building types and then that you're looking at crime and emergency and conflict. And there were those lenses that you talked of, right? Network, density, and there were a few more. Could you just repeat what were
Yeah,
the others? Network,
yeah.
density, and?
Interdependency, security.
Okay. So, so when I was looking at your drawings in detail, and that is where my question about doubt for a researcher came in. It was from your presentation. I was wondering whether the similarities that you saw when you were looking at crime, emergency, and conflict, were they much closely linked to the building type, or was it more closely linked to, say, something like network or density as a parameter? By which I mean that irrespective of whether it's an apartment or a row house, if the, say, the geometry of spaces or the plan organization was such that from the windows you could see uh, uh, what was happening on the street, or if it was uh, orthogonal geometry versus non-orthogonal geometry, is it so? Did the thief get lost because it was a self-built apartment housing, or did the thief get lost because it was a non-orthogonal geometry where with multiple dead ends? So which defined the lostness more? Is it building type as a category, or is it the properties or characteristics of building type as a category? The same question I had when you were, say, talking of uh, emergency also. So what is interesting when you showed emergency in the self-built situation was that the fire happened and the next door neighbor was very close to it, and there was an opening in the house of the next door neighbor which looked directly onto this. Whereas in the apartment typology, your next door neighbor's openings obviously cannot look into your apartment. It's a issue of the central core, right? Whereas what you said is that the next block, your neighboring block neighbor sort of looked into it. Or was the first person who could identify that it's the fire. So it is the relationship and the distance between openings which I feel could be correlated. It would be interesting to correlate that aspect of the spatiality of space with whether or not it works well when it comes to crime or emergency, rather than saying that all apartments are of have this quality versus all row houses. So I felt that your drawings were speaking, were telling us something much more nuanced. Whereas I feel that as a researcher, what happens is because we started with the idea of, apartment, row house, and self-built housing being three different built environments, we feel that the way events play out in all three would also be similar. Yeah. So I'll just quickly also mention Somesh's thesis. So the reason why I asked when you chose the drawing is I was quite intrigued by when you were showing these painters, who are who are painting with multiple vantage points. I think it's a fascinating beginning point. And so my question to you was, so if those paintings had multiple vantage points and therefore multiple vanishing points, would you see plan as a drawing which has infinite vanishing points? Because I can hover anywhere on the plan and there is no vanishing point. So is it a drawing with infinite vanishing points? So should I put it as the extreme example of multiple vanishing points drawing? Or would you put it in the other end of the spectrum, saying that uh, uh, a plan, because it is two-dimensional in nature, cannot give me the kind of information that a perspective can give? And I think the drawings were very fascinating. And when you were showing these different drawings, I was trying to read into it, and I was trying to figure out, are you using sectional perspective as a method, or are you just using uh, Indian miniature painting kind of drawing as a method where it is neither plan nor perspective? And I think there is a lot in there that we can discuss in your case. And finally, coming to Jugal, I felt that so again, focusing on the drawings, I was looking at, at places you were drawing the same space where activity was happening and where activity was not happening. Uh, so in fact, I was wondering if there was some way to map these spaces pre-COVID and post-COVID. And if you are using only drawing as a tool, as a research tool to make a point, it might be interesting to, if I have a pre-COVID drawing of a public space in a city and a post-COVID drawing, and if I have 10 such or 5 such spaces in the city, and just by showing that in for some spaces in the city, the pre-COVID and post-COVID drawings look almost identical, which would be a sad commentary on the public space, because it means that the inhabitation of people doesn't sort of modify public space in any way. So I felt that drawing as a tool could have been very interestingly pushed forward in your research as well. So these were some of the thoughts I was having while you were presenting, and which is what I tried to sort of categorize as questions on doing research, questions on drawing as a research tool, and questions on the content, which is about architecture and care. Yeah.
Thanks, Vishwanath.
Yeah.
That was quite sharp and useful, I think. Prasad, would you want to go?
Yeah. So, I mean, I had some of the questions that I think Vishwanath also raised, so I won't repeat them. I'll try and go through each of the presentation and then maybe draw out some thoughts or some larger questions that I had. For Abhishek, okay. So I was actually kind of interested in the video format of, or is it a GIF, where you sort of showing these different, because a lot of the work that you're trying to do about atmospheres has to do with, certain ideas of flows and rhythms and networks between these different elements, right? Because you're trying to think about connections between the built environment and the environment as such, but also between people and environment largely. Right? And there are certain drawings where the building sort of disappears, right? And it sort of has this, image of connections that we draw between the environment and people. And so does the video in some sense, where you show, I mean, it's primarily to talk about wind flow and connections between what is happening inside and outside. Right? Now, one thing that I would say is that, the idea of environment gets reduced to light and wind in some sense, and also maybe, animals. But if one is think about atmospheres, it's a, a larger concept, right? It has to do the biochemical processes, but also connections that might not physically be very proximate, right? But we are drawn into a proximity with something that is far, right? And in that sense, a drawing is, like the multiple vantage point drawing is a useful tool to actually, the drawing itself can draw out connections between different elements, right? And if you're trying to think about connections, then that is a good way to explore a drawing. But there's something also missing, which is the materiality of the building itself, which becomes just a block, right? The material itself also has a life, right? And so how do you draw the drawing itself with a life, right? The building itself has a life. So how do you sort of build it into the drawing, because it is, a building is also a way of connecting to the environment, right? But if you just leave the building unexplored as a material form, then it might, it doesn't really serve the purpose of what you're actually trying to do. So, the wall and the mud and the wood, I mean, all of those are also sensorial elements, have smell and all of those things, right? They're also sort of building a relationship between what is inside and outside, right? So you might want to explore. In the second one, yeah, I mean, I thought it was an interesting study in terms of a cross-section of exploring the same concepts across 3 different housing types in some ways. But I do have the kind of, question that Vishwanath also has is, how much does the field ask you to rework the concepts that you're evaluating, right? So, and I found it particularly important because, when you talk about the apartment technology, right, a lot of the human sense of security and care gets replaced by technology, right? So you have pipes running all over the buildings, you have CCTV cameras and, fire sprinklers and all of those things, in some sense, which certain other settlements can't afford, get folded into the human relationships, right? So I'm not really connected to but a security guard has a CCTV camera that's connecting us, right? A fire sprinkler in some sense is connecting us, right? So, so the building type also has to start reworking the, maybe the concept itself and how you're studying it, right? The sense of security needs to be reworked when it comes to an apartment as compared to, right? And, there was something that was specific is that when you're looking at a spatiality of neighborhood and questions of care, and what we spoke about was, looking at routines of care, right, in some ways. But what you look at in some sense are events, right, which is, theft or, domestic violence. I mean, domestic violence in some sense is routinized, but, does the architecture itself routinize these events in some ways, right? But also theft and fire. And, these are certain kinds of eventful things of security around which architecture does start working, right? There's a paranoia of something is going to happen, so you have that, right? But there's also an everyday sense of care, which is, paying attention to each other, questions of illnesses and, I mean, gossip is a big way of everyday care, right? People talking about each other, right? But you sort of move away from that to think about these larger events. And that is something I feel might be, to think about the building type of the apartment, because it does have those questions of, security and fire and all of those things, as against the kind of care that or the questions of care that you might be finding in other kinds of neighborhoods might be very different, right? So you want to explore these different, so you are, exploring the same concept, but differently in different places, right? Because otherwise, you would land up with questions of porosity and, and people are, I mean, thinking about care in different places, and it might not be so much about the visual sense, but also the hearing and all of those things, right? And there, architecture in some ways does matter because, yeah, I mean, you're right, in apartment type, it doesn't afford those ideas of paying attention. But then what does paying attention mean in an apartment building is it that the idea of care is itself going, or care is becoming a sense of security, which is about theft and all of those things, right? So the architectural form changes to work with that idea of care and security. So, okay. And Sumesh, I had a similar question like Vishwanath, which was, is the different drawing styles, is it a question of mood of the drawing and what you're looking at? Because is it an exploratory method to look at these different sites, right? Or is it a color scheme? And I mean, I think that is what he was asking. right? Or are you trying to explore in some sense the mood of the place or the sensorial part of it, right? Now, one thing that I did find, the multiple vantage point, I mean, Patwardhan's painting in some sense are trying to draw out relationships which the architecture might not allow you to do, right? So a drawing allows you to draw these things into relationships, right? Which I can't in some sense, right? And your drawings are trying to do that. And I feel they need to be explored more to actually think about the concept that you're working with, right? Which is the idea of security and or the idea of the neighborhood and how much does it lend to a sense of care and security, social security, right? Now, there was also, the way you set up the project, I thought was, this idea between the slum versus the, you sort of draw these versus binary between different typologies, as if, one allows for certain things and that the other one doesn't, right? And in that sense, I felt that, in the first one, there's more of a people playing a part in the architecture, and the other one, people almost get incarcerated into the housing and don't really seem to be doing much, right? And I think that it's not as if, in an SRA, people aren't trying to do things, or, in the other typologies. So you need to also work with that, because there seems to be a judgment that is there already. So, to actually also think about what are these relationships of care that are there in an apartment building, and then how do you respond to it, right? It's not a question of one form is better than the other. I mean, in some sense it might be, but it's also that if you're working with people in some sense as an architect, right? You also need to draw out what is it that people are doing in these other typologies also, right? In the case of an orphanage, or in the case of, right? Because it almost becomes that there's a sense of care in the first one, and the second one it becomes a sense of security, like almost like a police security, right? And that is also what the drawing, in some sense, the mood of the drawing does. And I felt like, if you try to think about in either of the cases, what is the relationship of security and care amongst people, right? So despite buildings, you might find some clues to work with, right? That is what, even if sometimes the form doesn't lend, but the people do build certain things that the form doesn't allow for, to allow for the form to start changing, right? So that is something that I felt was missing. Jugal, I mean, the interesting thing, and this is something to go back to Vishwanath's point, was, so, I mean, frankly, I felt that, it was, it's sort of a question between an architectural inquiry and social inquiry in some sense, right? In the sense of you're trying to study, Jugal, you're trying to study, the role of organizations and the different kind of practices around festivals and how a place kind of changes over time, right? And in which sense, you're trying to understand what the roles of different organizations and schools and, ALMs and all of these residential associations in different four localities, right? Now, as an architectural inquiry, right, I was wondering that is the idea that you do a study and look at how architecture can respond, right? Because in that sense, what the other three students, right, there's a clear architectural inquiry, which I felt in some sense, sort of frames off what is going on outside of it, right? The relationships and networks between people and, between things and human beings and all of those things, right? Which might not be able to be drawn in some sense, right? Or the role of organizations and these kind of things, right? And in last one, I mean, Jugal, it's something of more of a question, but also a suggestion is, if you're thinking about questions of, what can architecture, how does it respond to certain social situations, which might not necessarily be in some sense architectural, or questions of architectural inquiry, which is, role of organizations and politics between people. How does architecture respond to it in that situation? So is that what you're trying to do? Because if not, then the architectural inquiry needs a little more clarifications, both in terms of the method, but also the drawing of it. Yeah. I mean, larger thoughts, I feel like, since we're talking about psychogrammars and, thinking about drawing relationships which happens in the mind between unrelated elements, and a drawing is a good way to explore it. But I felt in some sense that the drawings get restricted by the physicality and proximity of things, right? A drawing can draw a relationship between something that is in US to Bombay, right? I mean, there's no thing inhibiting it. So an inner inquiry does not has to be inhibited by the space of the body, right? It can go anywhere. And that ways, I feel like the drawing can actually be a useful tool to explore relationships that haven't been explored so far, right? And they can be between, say, Arctic change and something happening in Dhule also, right? So how do you draw out relationships between things that haven't been explored in drawings, which are architectural drawings? That was one thing. And the second thing was, is a poor architectural inquiry a good architectural inquiry in some sense? Because it sort of, allows you to move out of the frame of architecture to explore other things in some ways, right? And how do you respond to it? That was the second thing. And the third was, this is again to just do with method of research is, a lot of thing about care is not just paying attention to someone, but also allowing the other person to, change what you think, right? There's some sense of a reciprocity that is involved in care, is paying attention to what the other person is also trying to communicate, right? So how much does the field and the city that you're working with change the method of research, right? Or the concepts that you're working with, when do you allow to sort of let them go and think that I need to work with something new, right? So that was the third thing. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Vishwanath and Prasad. I just wanted to kind of, based on the conversations we've had so far, and I actually have a doubt, and the doubt is actually, why are we discussing care as a specific thing, and where does it come from? In the sense that is it rooted in somewhere, in some ways, is it rooted in an idea of space being, or a system of living together being independent of agencies? And in some ways, is it opening up a question about going back to interpersonal relationships, community relationships, more as instruments of organizing community and space than, does it come from that corner, or does it come from somewhere else? I really am not very, very clear about why, what purpose would the idea of looking at this whole discussion through a lens of care, or looking at space and typologies through the lens of care brings about. That was one question. The second question is, in most cases that the students took up, it's an extension of the question of care in some ways, is that I wonder if, there is an inbuilt, and I think Prasad kind of very rightly pointed out at some point, that, is there a predetermined notion about the goodness of these things? And are we constructing, therefore, an imagination of virtues? Many, many years ago, when I was a student, I read an article which was, I don't even remember the exact title, but it said, virtues of a half-empty stomach, and it kind of begins to describe how middle class constructs virtues of its, a life which is extremely frugal because of economic reasons or whatever it may be. So I'm just wondering if we are ourselves constructing, for example, the question does come, are we saying then that if the doctor's doors are open all the time and the neighbors' doors are open all the time, are we constructing an imagination that this life does not require privacy? And so are there very many things that we tend to ignore and I have similar concerns about the, in some ways, over emphasizing community life of a child, So, I mean, there was a certain amount, there still is a lot of discomfort in living in that kind of a thing. So some of these questions also kind of, and the last question, which is one of the most interesting one, which both of you kind of raised, was about the issue of drawing. I also think that we are at a time where the idea of drawing could be dead. It is a extension of our own practices that we've been kind of engaged with as students, and I know, coming from an area of the professional practice, I draw to explore. Yes, all right. I keep drawing to understand and inquire, right? But in our quest to kind of construct new imaginations and questions, or even to communicate, are we not in a time where we have many more instruments which can actually give us the ability to generate a far more powerful sensorial experience of something, of any issue that we're talking about, through various mediums that are available to us today? And should we be talking about drawings, or should we be talking about instruments of sensorial experience that we can use to kind of, extend our imaginations and our questions? So these are 3-4 things that I thought are important issues that I just wanted to kind of put on the table. I'll now like to kind of open up this discussion for anybody else who may want to comment, critique, or add to the overall discussion. We have another 20 minutes, roughly, to go through that. So let me open up the house for everybody to kind of comment and critique.
Sorry, can I, Ravi?
Yeah.
I just wanted to kind of respond to your question of drawing, because that's how we began also. I think drawing, the way we are also looking at it, and of course, these are the beginnings and lots of questions to them and kind of develop. But drawing is not in the narrow sense of the line drawing, but to kind of explore, looking at drawing as a large spectrum, so in that sense, video and different formats kind of also come into that. And I mean, in that sense, also referring to Michael Taussig, who kind of who talks about drawing as a drawing out.
Yeah, correct.
Other than the drawing. So I mean, we definitely don't mean drawing in the limited sense of a line drawing. So I think there are some, you'll see later, there are students who are also exploring other, like photography, films and other things. But I think we're talking about drawing in a larger sense and a kind of full spectrum of thinking through. So, yeah.
No, sure. I think one of my own students in this dissertation has kind of given up the idea of this orthographic drawing and has produced work which is more in the other space of understanding space. And yeah, anybody else?
Maybe the students want to respond to some of those questions.
Yeah. So I think I'll respond to the common point of those multiple vantages and setting up of the mood. So like I said before, I think I had decided I'll be looking at Sudhir Patwardhan's method of this multiple vantages. So in the case of Ambedkar Nagar also, if you see that or the pavement dwellers, for example. The plan doesn't work, but like you said, the sectional axos where they are using the walls or the trees or the underside of the bridges, which shows it also opens up those narrow spaces in that method. And like you said, the miniature paintings where I also tried, it was more of a exploratory method where, like you said, the mood of the in the neighborhood was very important. Like in the case of the shelter home, it was like a dark and gloomy space inside, but surrounded by all these, the commuters on the bridge or the railway station and the main road. But it shows like this containment, and I think I was really trying to explore with that method. Yeah, I'm still thinking about the others. Anyone else would like to go?
So, like what Krishna told about, like how is the security or the care being formed in a sense that it is orthogonal or it is due to
Grishma, can you
the.
speak a little louder
Sorry.
or maybe into
Yeah.
the, yeah.
So, is it the self-built is because they're self-building the care is creating there, or it is not orthogonal? I think this two-way. It is definitely because of the build form also, and also due to the networks and the interdependencies which are created. Like when I started the question of how the process went, I I never started with readings. I entered through sites only, and then I condensed my understanding of how the working of the networks of care are, and then I eventually narrowed down to those lens. But I realized there are many much more things which are overlapping, and it does not only depend on one particular factor, but many such elements. For the drawing, yes, it was a bit difficult because I felt to narrate a story of care or to show what is happening in one particular event, it became difficult for me personally. But then, as Rupali said, we were trying different methods of drawing, and how, like, for me, I had it in mind that I wanted a still picture and not something, some another medium. So uh, that that is one thing. And yes, I agree that my thesis somewhere narrowed down to events and not the networks of care which I wanted to explore. So I think it in the end narrowed down to events.
Yeah. So
Go ahead, Abhishek. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So about what Vishwanath said about the drawing methodologies and how do you think we communicate through it also. So during the start of my thesis, I couldn't draw the flows because the drawings weren't allowing me to draw them in a static way. So I started drawing a sensorial drawings to like exploring a much more way to like how would I explore how can I explore what is happening in the environment. So through the readings of atmospheres, I was kind of it kind of pulled me towards exploring in the sensorial way to draw the flows. But still, the drawings couldn't explain it because the flows which I was thinking, I'm still thinking, I'm still exploring the environmental flows. I didn't continue in a way. So to that for that only, I started drawing, uh, making a video about it. So and about the wind flow, it was much more through the experience, and the drawings and the video were made on a daily basis because I was spending a whole day in a house and observing the activities happening in the house of the actors, as well as how the wind kind of comes in and in different places how the breeze kind of affects us. And what Prashant said about the materiality, I started exploring the drawings through the materiality at the start, but in the process, I kind of lost the touch of the materiality, and I kind of stopped exploring it. But my main intent was to focus on the materiality because materials used in the build form kind of created the environment in the drawings which I was focusing on. Yeah.
Yeah, may I?
Yeah, Jugal.
Yeah. So yeah, the Prasad took the right way that drawing a relationship and the architectural drawing were missing in the my case. So so what happened that from the first year I'm trying to do something from the experiment on the drawings, but at that time, at the moment when you have very less time to present in the thesis, and I have to explore one too. But the idea of my mentor was a very simple. Okay, you have to build a narrative and stories like, but I have to build in my drawing style. But for the lack of time, wo hua nahi, like that. Yeah,
कोई बात नहीं, जुगल.
I will look
करते
forward
रहना.
and make better.
Yeah, continue. I mean, I think
Yeah.
your inquiry is a lengthy one. It's ongoing, no? I mean, your questions don't end with this session, right? I hope they don't. Anybody else wants to add to this?
So
I
can
think-
I say
Yeah,
one?
go ahead.
Yeah, please. Somesh.
Yeah. So talking about the method of research. So earlier, this research was going to be like a comparative analysis between three self-built neighborhoods, and then the transformations of these existing neighborhoods. But then also I discussed with Ravi yesterday how sometimes we over-romanticize these neighborhoods. Like, like he said, the doctor's doors are kept open and everything will happen. So that's why I think it was important to identify opportunities and the contradictions from all these neighborhoods, and then put them together. So yeah, I think, and so this is, so it was not a comparative analysis, but I looked at these 5 neighborhoods as and then I identified all these opportunities that one can hold on to, and then the contradictions that emerge in these neighborhoods.
Right.
Yeah.
So can I make 2 minutes more?
Yeah, Jugal, please go ahead. We have 2 minutes.
The question asks, मतलब विश्वनाथ जी ने बोले कि pre-COVID और post-COVID के बाद what happened. So idea of my thesis was मतलब अगर कोविड नहीं होता तो मेरा क्या होता, मतलब मुझे और दूसरा सेट लेना था, बट अभी कोविड हो गया तो आई वांट टू यूजिंग माय नेबरहुड ओनली. सो या दैट्स ऑल.
So, Jugal, that thought occurred to me because I was observing my neighborhood during the COVID times, the place where I stay. And after Corona, I mean, at least during the first and the second wave, the space looked completely different because it is a very old walk-up apartment, uh, state government housing colony. And so there would always be a lot of people on the streets, kids playing. But when I went to some of my friends, or when I discussed with some of my colleagues who are living in a different housing type, they said that there is, hardly any difference uh, uh, that we see on the ground pre-corona and during corona, because the density of people in those spaces, in those neighborhoods, are very different. So it was just a thought that I had when I looked at your drawings, which was very interesting. But I think I also wanted to sort of take up on what Prasad was talking about, drawing out relations, or even Rupali was saying that definitely, yes, drawing is just one of the tools to think analytically or to think creatively. But I often think so, therefore, when we are discussing about drawings, and we say that drawing is the tool, it's either used as a creative tool or it's used as an analytical tool. So for the time being, I'm not talking of drawing as a communication tool like working drawings or other drawings, or maybe even competition entries where we are just communicating our design. If I talk of drawing either as an analytical tool or design tool. So if I give the analogy of a hammer as a tool, and so maybe the hammer has hammered a nail on the wall, and I could look at the nail and how it was hammered and discuss why the nail is bent or it has not gone deep in, and maybe then look at the tool that was used and sort of critique the use of the tool for a specific purpose. But I think what happens is a lot of times, because what we present or what we show to each other is the hammer only, or the focus is the hammer. So I see these drawings, for example, but actually what is required, what I need to do in my mind is to connect that specific drawing to any kind of inference or conclusion that is being drawn, which is the nail, and ask myself, what was the appropriateness or the value that that tool added to make that a particular inference, right? So I think there is always this tension where, or this issue that because we are looking at the tool, if you are saying drawing is also a tool of thinking or tool of analytical thinking, to just look at the hammer without seeing what it hammered or how the nail got driven in the wall, I also find it that part of it a bit problematic.
Yeah, Prasad.
Yeah, no, I mean, wondering, just to kind of respond, it might be, a different way of looking if you think about it as a medium, right?
Right.
A medium like, like a jinn or any kind of a ghost, which becomes a medium to connect between two worlds, right? And in that sense, what Rupali was also referring to was, in a medium, when you're drawing, it's also a process of being drawn out of oneself, right? That you sort of get drawn out of yourself in the process of drawing into a space where you don't necessarily know what is going on exactly. But that's the exploratory part, right? It's not necessarily we know in the drawing that what we are drawing is, because a tool is like you have an end, right? If you want to nail a hammer, but a drawing is not to nail it, but to actually draw out things, right? To explore it without necessarily knowing where it might even go, right? So in that sense, drawing can become that, what, the term is like, to explore a psychogrammar of things that we don't necessarily know exactly what is going on, right? So the concepts have to be reworked, new methods have to be invented to actually draw these relationships out. So it allows us to sort of enter into a space where we've not really figured out everything yet.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So if we look at an exploratory drawing versus, or as opposed to a purposeful drawing, where the purpose is pre-stated, which is what I found interesting in some of the presentations that were done in this session. And that was the question I was asking in the back of the mind, that how many of these drawings are premeditated, where you know that I want to make this kind of drawing and you go about making this drawing, and how many of these drawings are blind explorations that I start to draw and I don't know what that drawing will tell me, but I let that doubt remain, that I say, okay, I will just go to the site and keep drawing something, and let's see, something will come out of it. But at the same time, maybe there is also another kind of drawing where I say, okay, now I have explored this, now I want to communicate this, so I will decide that I want to do this kind of a drawing and then do it. So I think it's very important, as while drawing, to be clear that I could use drawing in different ways in order to arrive at something.
Yes. Anybody else wants to add anything? We just have a couple of minutes more, so we could do that. Anuj, we have the time, right? Till 11? Or are we overrunning? I can't hear you, Anuj.
Yeah. Can you now hear me?
Yeah.
No, we have time. We have 5 minutes.
Yeah, correct. Till 11, right? Yeah. Anybody has anything else to say? Otherwise, it's not a bad idea to wind up a little early.
Just in the, because I have the privilege of speaking, right? Continuing what the discussion was going on, I was.
We can't hear you, Anuj. You're muted. Can't hear you. No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. But there's an echo.
So I was just thinking that the imperative of the visual that we consider in architectural drawing, like have we been able to kind of go beyond that? And if, as long as we have the imperative of the visual, how do we open up what drawing can be for us? And in the expanded sense of drawing out or culling out. And particularly for this session, I was wondering that how do you draw care, or how do you draw the architecture of care? What would be the medium? Would it be a visual? Because all of the presentations were talking about a very shared feeling of care. And so how do you, and that's what is always difficult to establish, that how does architecture play a role in that, and what kind of like how do we mobilize that kind of spatiality through the tools that we have? So I was just thinking about those things.
True. Okay. Since we don't have any further questions and discussions, thank you all. This is just, I really hope that the presenters kind of continue their search and quest, because I think the way Prasad starts with this class is to ask them a question about, what is it that's bothering them, or is there a question that they have? So I hope that they continue this inquiry and kind of move ahead, keep going ahead, and the next semester, this semester actually is an opportunity to explore it even through a design project for themselves. So I think that's where it becomes very interesting to see how they take this further. So thank you, Abhishek. Thank you, Jugal, Sumesh, and Grishma. And thank you both, Vishwanath and Prasad, for being here, as always, by our side to kind of, make your valuable contributions to the school. Okay. So what time is the next session, Anuj? You can take over, I think.
The next session will begin at 11:30.
Yeah.
So we can join back at 11:30.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.